They say the human body can survive weeks without food, days without water, and only minutes without air. But what if I told you, this story isn't about survival? It's about what happens after the last breath. When the heart stops, the pulse fades, and the world believes you're gone. Because in this story, death was only the beginning. No headlines covered it. No documentaries, no books, no public statements. Just a few whispers, scattered across forgotten forums, buried government archives, and a handful of families who still set a place at the dinner table for someone who, officially, never existed. The case you're about to hear doesn't belong to history textbooks or Netflix dramatizations. It belongs to late-night conversations, to people who swear they saw things they shouldn't have seen. A security guard who died before he could finish his report. A scientist whose final email was one sentence long. We lost control. And then, silence. For years, no one knew what really happened inside that facility. Only that everyone who entered, vanished. No burial, no remains, no explanation. The government declared it a failure. A paused program. A file closed. But files don't close themselves. Someone closes them. Someone makes sure they stay closed. Yet here we are, decades later, with scraps of truth they failed to burn. A shipping manifest with names that don't exist in any registry. Satellite images of a complex that vanished from maps after one night of gunfire. And a witness, or what's left of one, who swore the people inside weren't supposed to survive. Not because the experiment went wrong, but because it went exactly as planned. Ask yourself something before we continue. If the government found a way to bring someone back from the edge of death, why would they test it on human beings? Why choose cartel captives, prisoners no one would claim, people whose disappearance would raise no questions? And more importantly, why did nobody survive? Every answer leads to another locked door. Every fact contradicts the official report. Every person who spoke about what happened, disappeared. Cleanly. Quietly. Completely. But tonight, nothing will be quiet. Tonight, we're dragging every sealed document, every redacted page, every erased file back into the light. Piece by piece. Image by image. Testimony by testimony. Because the truth isn't hidden. It's buried. And whoever buried it never expected anyone to find the shovel. So sit back. Take a breath now, while it's easy. Because as we unfold this story, as we walk deeper into the ruins of a project that should never have existed, you may start to feel the same thing the test subjects felt on their final night. The sense that something is very wrong. An escape stopped being possible a long time ago. What you will hear next isn't speculation. It's what remained after every witness vanished. This is the government experiment that nobody survived. And now that you're here, there's no turning back. Before we pull apart the classified bones of this story, we need to step back. Back to the place where everything began. The year was never publicly acknowledged, but archived procurement records and weather pattern comparisons put it between 1998 and 2003, a period shadowed by cartel expansion, intelligence overreach, and an unspoken war waged in abandoned corners of the map. A time when governments weren't just fighting the drug trade. They were trying to reshape it. The location? A stretch of unmarked desert somewhere between northern Mexico and the southwestern United States, a borderland big enough for secrets, dry enough to swallow evidence, and ignored enough that even a facility with armed perimeter lights could sit for years without a single newspaper asking why. Locals called it La Zona Muerta. The dead zone. At first glance it looked like any other forgotten military installation, cracked water towers, rust-eaten hangars, a flagpole with no flag. But satellite imaging showed something different: heat signatures underground, not above. Buried corridors. Reinforced concrete shafts. Ventilation units baked into the sand like bones no one was supposed to dig up. Someone spent money, a lot of it, to make this place exist without ever appearing on a map. Officially, the site never housed prisoners. Officially, it wasn't a research lab. Officially, it wasn't even real. Yet logistics records, leaked years later, list quantities of medical supplies no border facility would ever need. 400 vials of adrenaline analog. 62 liters of experimental neural stimulant. Blood oxygenators usually reserved for cardiac resurrection trials. And 58 unregistered cadavers marked post-recovery. Recovery from what? No file explains it. At least, not the files we're supposed to see. Then there are the unofficial stories. The ones people only whisper when no device is recording. Truck drivers paid in cash to deliver sealed containers at night. Cattle ranchers who heard screams echo from beneath the earth. A woman in the nearest town who swore she saw a convoy of black vehicles leave the site one dawn. No headlights, no plates, moving like they were escaping something inside rather than defending it. Rumor says cartel members weren't arrested, they were collected. Handpicked. Vanishing from safe houses and border transfers like someone was drafting them for a war nobody signed off on. Rumor says they didn't choose these men for interrogation. They chose them for endurance. For what their bodies could take. Before breaking. But this is where the narrative fractures. The official story, what remains in redacted legal briefings, claims the project was humanitarian. A bold attempt to develop a medical procedure to reverse fatal injury in the field. Something that could save soldiers. Save civilians. Even save the captives themselves. A story polished for press release, though no press release ever came. The unofficial version? The one whispered by surviving families, retired contractors, and a priest who once heard the confessions of a dying doctor. They say this wasn't medicine. It was manufacture. Not an attempt to stop death, but to use it. Harness it. Weaponize the human body after the soul had already stepped away. Because what they were building wasn't survival. It was return. Not revival. Return. And every person who walked into that underground structure was supposed to come back out. Not one did. Which leaves us with the question no report, no theory, no government apology has ever answered. If this was a humanitarian breakthrough, why erase every document? Why silence every witness? Why deny the existence of a facility photographed from space? Why would leaders capable of saving lives choose instead to bury the only evidence of what could have changed medicine forever? Something doesn't line up. Something isn't logical. Something in the official version is either missing or deliberately removed. The deeper we go, the more it feels like the truth we were given was constructed like a stage set. Lights bright in front, but behind the curtain, nothing but darkness. Fresh paint to hide rotting wood. And every name we've traced. Every timestamp, every contractor, every shipment ends the same way. Dead. Redacted. Gone. And that is where our real story begins. Not in the documents we were handed, but in the gaps. In what's missing. In what was erased so violently it only made the truth louder. If you're ready, we go deeper next, into the background foundation, where we uncover who funded this project, why they chose cartel captives, and how the experiment spiraled into the most lethal secret in modern history. Because now we know one thing for certain. The official story doesn't add up. This didn't happen in an age of primitive records or missing archives. No, this took place in a time where every movement can be tracked, where satellites see through clouds, where digital footprints last longer than bones. And yet, somehow, what happened here left no trail worth following. The first thing you must understand is location. Not the exact coordinates, because those don't exist publicly anymore. What we do have are map fragments, leaked transit logs, blurry photos taken through the window of a moving car. They all point to a region between three converging deserts, a place government maps label only with one word: restricted. No towns for miles. No farmland. No visible reason to claim that much empty land, unless something was buried beneath it. Locals, the few who remember anything, speak of nights where trucks rolled through without headlights. Engines cut long before they reached the perimeter. Men in unmarked uniforms pushing those vehicles the final meters, as if the sound of an engine alone was forbidden. Dogs barked. Children cried. And parents told them never to ask why. The official explanation was clean, polished to perfection. Medical research. Just 2 words, enough to calm the public, enough to justify secrecy. People hear medicine and think healing. They rarely think testing. But the unofficial reports, the kind buried in forums, passed between journalists who disappeared, paint a very different picture. They describe subjects, not patients. Contracts signed under duress. Families receiving vague messages that didn't sound like the person they loved. Some letters arrived typed, from people too young to have ever owned a typewriter. Others were handwritten, but the handwriting didn't match. One mother kept every letter her son sent from that facility. There were 6 in total. In the first, the tone was hopeful. In the 6th, it felt like someone else had written it with his name. Construction records don't exist. But satellite archives captured something, just enough. Over the course of 14 months, an empty piece of land transformed into a self-contained compound. Barracks. Research wings. A power grid not connected to any public utility. No building permits. No civilian oversight. And no roads leading in or out that appear on current maps. It's as if the facility materialized, and once they were finished using it, it was erased. One ex-contractor claims he saw structures rise from the earth overnight. Prefabricated walls lifted into place by machines with no visible operators. He signed a non-disclosure form under threat of imprisonment. That man vanished in 2009. His car was found at a bus station. He was never seen boarding any bus. Then there's the supply chain anomaly. Tens of thousands of vials of sedatives ordered under the guise of emergency stockpiling. Enough to anesthetize over 20,000 people for surgery. But the population inside the facility never exceeded 300. Food shipments contained almost no protein. No fresh produce. Just starch, fuel, not nutrition. You don't feed people like that unless you want them weak. Suggestible. Easier to control. Patients weren't being treated. They were being managed. Like livestock. Like inventory. And then we stumble into the part nobody has been able to explain away. Not even the agencies trying to bury this story. Financials. Over $300 million routed through shell corporations registered to dead individuals. Funds approved by no committee, traceable only through fragments leaked by a whistleblower whose name was redacted even in internal reports. Every time a paper trail begins, it ends abruptly, like someone slammed the brakes on history itself. Bank logs stop mid-transaction. Emails cut mid-sentence. One invoice reads: delivery scheduled for personnel training to begin immediately after. The rest is blacked out. Not redacted, scrubbed. Like it never existed. You may be wondering at this point. If no one survived, how do we know any of this? The answer lies not in what was preserved, but what was left behind. You see, the most terrifying thing about this case is not the missing bodies. It's the missing context. It's that every record stops too neatly. Every timeline ends in perfect symmetry, perfectly silent, perfectly dead. Secrecy is normal in government programs. Redaction is expected. But total erasure? That's something else entirely. Because secrecy keeps information hidden. Erasure implies something happened that must never be remembered. And this is where the story turns. We've established the place. The money. The facility that built itself out of nothing and disappeared just as fast. Now come the people, the ones chosen for this experiment. People with records. Families. Faces. People who were alive, until they weren't. What happened next is why this story refuses to die. Up to this point, everything could still be dismissed: construction anomalies, forged letters, strange funding trails. Governments have buried stranger things with less effort. But when the facility shifted from observation to experimentation, the tone of every note, every call, and every leak changed permanently. This is when people began disappearing. And not gradually, not organically. They vanished like pages torn from a book, leaving the binding perfectly intact. The first vanished subjects were labeled reassigned. What doesn't make sense is why families received no forwarding detail. No hospital transfer. No military relocation. Just silence. Here's where conflicting witness statements begin to tear open the truth. One guard, anonymous now, or dead, claimed the first missing patient left on foot, escorted by 2 doctors who walked him past the gates at dawn. Another guard, interviewed years later, swore no one ever walked out of that facility alive. Both statements recorded. Both archived. Both real. Yet both cannot be true. A third witness, a janitorial contractor, described waking to the sound of screaming through the ventilation system. Not one voice, dozens. When he reported it to his supervisor, he was scheduled for mandatory psychological evaluation and removed from the premises within 24 hours. His contract was terminated. His bank accounts frozen. His interview transcript ends abruptly halfway through a sentence. Whatever he was about to say never made it into words. Then come the sealed files. Dozens of them, locked under experimental classification protocols normally reserved for war. Not medical. Not pharmaceutical. Weapons-grade clearance. Subjects stopped being called patients in internal memos. They became units. Assets. Their names converted to alphanumeric strings. Their histories erased line by line, like chalk under rain. If this was research, why redact identities? Healing does not require anonymity. But weapons testing does. Breakthroughs and failures were recorded on the same page, because inside that compound, those 2 words meant the same thing. A breakthrough was simply failure survivable enough to repeat. And failure was anything that ended too quickly to learn from. The subjects were injected, exposed, isolated. Their vitals monitored. Their dreams recorded. Their screams noted in margins like scientific footnotes. Personnel logs show increased sedation protocols beginning month 6. By month 9, subjects were restrained for most of the day. Not because they were violent, but because their bodies wouldn't stay still. Witnesses described uncontrollable shaking, like every muscle firing at once. Some said bones fractured merely from tension. Others claimed subjects remained calm, too calm, staring with dilated pupils like they were listening to something nobody else could hear. Some said subjects spoke languages they never learned. Meanwhile, the number of missing subjects rose. 1 week, 3. Next week, 11. By month 10, over 40% of the population was unaccounted for. Some reports claim they died. Others that they transformed. One leak, just one, mentions transfer protocols. Transfers to where? No receiving facility exists. No transport logs recorded. It's as if these people were moved somewhere that wasn't meant to be accessed by road or air or record. Then, all at once, the doctors changed how they wrote their logs. Clinical notes became short. Brevity replacing detail. Sentences stripped bare of humanity. Subject stable. Reaction minimal. Proceeding to next tier. The language of science began sliding toward the language of warfare. And this is where something new enters the story. Something more disturbing than vanishing people or conflicting testimonies. Leaked containment memos indicate protocols for extreme behavioral deviation. Translation. Subjects were no longer fully human in behavior. Guards requested heavier restraints. Not for violence, but for non-responsiveness. Some subjects stopped eating. Others stopped speaking. One was found standing in a corner for 39 hours, pulse stable, eyes open, unblinking. The doctor assigned to him resigned the following morning. His resignation letter was one sentence long. I cannot continue. Meanwhile, newspapers began receiving anonymous envelopes. Scanned documents, blood-stained memos, shredded schedules pieced back together with surgical tape. One envelope included photos. Never published. Never officially acknowledged. The journalist who received them died in what police call a car malfunction. His brakes failed. He had told colleagues the night before. If the public saw what I saw, they would never sleep again. Whatever those photos showed, whatever his eyes carried to the grave, it was enough to cost him his life. From here, the truth becomes unavoidable. This facility wasn't researching resilience. It was manufacturing something. Breaking people down to rebuild them into something else. Because resilience isn't tested by isolation. It's tested by transformation. And we finally arrive at the moment where everything collapses. The leak. A flash drive mailed to a private investigator. Inside, scans of clinical records and a video file. The video runs for 2 minutes and 14 seconds before abruptly cutting to static. In those 2 minutes, we see something no researcher ever wanted the public to witness. A subject strapped to a table. Skin discolored. Vitals off every scale. And then, the subject opens his mouth and speaks. Not English. Not Spanish. Not any language we recognize. But every scientist in the room steps back. As if they understand him. As if the words weren't spoken, but felt. This is where the experiment stops being science. This is where it becomes a warning. The leak proved one thing beyond speculation. Someone survived long enough to speak. But if they lived, where are they now? They came in the dead of night, not in dramatic convoys with sirens and lights, but in silence engineered to feel like a mistake. Imagine a line of black vans slipping across the desert under a moon so thin it barely cast a shadow. The engines were cut a half-mile away. Men in dark coveralls pushed the vehicles the final stretch, hands gloved, faces blank beneath low caps. There were no manifest checks at the gate. No families gathered. No lawyers present. Only a rectangular set of metal doors that opened without a sound and swallowed whatever was in those vans like an animal taking prey into a den. The first transports were clinical. Prisoners marked by file numbers, not names, moved from one column of the manifest to the next as if inventory were currency. Handcuffs came off. Paperwork was signed with block letters and initials. Brief nods between military handlers and civilian scientists, professional, detached, like colleagues moving suitcases between flights. The impressions were of expert choreography, trained teams, rehearsed routes, a machine lubricated by secrecy and cash. But choreography requires rehearsal, and rehearsals need witnesses. There were none. Everything was rehearsed in closed rooms under non-disclosure agreements that carried threats heavier than any prison sentence. Drivers did not speak to each other. Guards rotated their shifts with faces averted. The men and women brought into the facility were told the same thing by the same officer at the same volume: this is temporary. Medical evaluation. Short-term stabilization. You will be treated. Some believed it. Others did not. Many had already been dragged out of homes or grabbed during raids on cartel safe houses that were never explained to families. Why pick drug traffickers, petty smugglers, disappeared side players? Because they are expendable, one official memo implied. Because the political fallout is low. Because missing men are rarely missed beyond their block. Once inside, the arrival routine was unsettlingly precise. Subjects processed in an intake bay that smelled faintly of antiseptic and industrial plastic. Their clothes were taken. Their hair was cut. They were given numbers swabbed on anonymous wristbands and led along a corridor that hummed with HVAC, fluorescent clatter, and the faint, constant throb of generators. Cameras observed from corners like cold eyes. The lighting was deliberately nondescript, neither warm nor harsh, designed to blur faces and flatten memory. Scientists in pale coats greeted the incoming line with tablet in hand and voices that could have been read from a brochure. Military handlers kept to the edges, an implacable presence in fatigues with no insignia. Agents in suits moved like problem solvers, talking on encrypted devices, eyes scanning for metadata the public would never see. It looked exactly like a research program. It felt exactly like something else. Protocols were enacted: biometric scans, baseline cognitive tests, blood draws, neuroimaging. Patients were told their vitals would be monitored, that they would be part of a trial that could change everything. Those words, change everything, were the bait. They wanted men who could be bent and remade, whose past lives would be considered collateral in service of a supposed higher good. The early logs, the ones that survived extraction by the handful, read like a medical drama: baseline stable. Consent signed. Initiating Phase 1. The language was careful, clinical, hopeful. For weeks the operation looked entirely contained. Procedures were carried out in tight cycles: sedation, stimulation, recovery. Early tests seemed controlled. Subjects convulsed and then subsided. Vitals spiked and then normalized. There were smiles in the observation wing when markers shifted in the desired direction. The headlines that never ran were written in the margins of reports: progress acceptable. Scale for field deployment plausible within 18 months. In private, a small number of stakeholders nodded. A few laughed quietly. Money flowed in measured tranches. The machine was turning. And then, subtler than a betrayal and more terrifying than a breakdown, the first cracks appeared. At first it was small data inconsistencies. A subject's EEG file mislabeled. A chain of custody time stamp off by minutes. A sedation log that registered a dosage half what the syringe actually contained. Administrative errors, insisted the project managers. Human error. The team increased oversight. Audits were instituted. External consultants brought in. They wanted, and often achieved, the appearance of redundancy. But redundancy collapses if what you're monitoring refuses the role assigned to it. Within a month, a handful of subjects began to do things the controls didn't account for. During stimulus trials, they would stare at blank walls as if tracking shadows others couldn't see. Their heart rates would drop for long stretches, only to leap off charts in perfect synchrony with another subject 3 rooms away, as if some shared sensorium hummed between them. One subject who had been mute for days suddenly spoke, not in words anyone knew, but in tone and cadence that prompted an immediate hush among the observing staff. The audio technicians flagged the files. The linguists were called in. The linguists felt the hairs on their necks and refused to certify a pattern. They were not asked again. Control rooms started to smell of coffee and fear. Senior officers ordered stricter containment, restraints of reinforced polymer, sedation schedules shorter and more aggressive, isolation protocols that turned observation cells into chambers. But even the restraints, military-grade and engineered to survive major strain, seemed more symbolic than effective. There were reports, quickly blacked out from the public record, of restraint points shearing under force, straps snapping where they were engineered to hold. The log entry on one such incident read only, "Restraint failure, review required." The following entry was a single redacted line. Actions escalated. Procedures intended to map resilience now probed the architecture of perception. Chemical stimulants combined with pattern light sequences, microcurrent pulses timed to sleep cycles, passive sensory overload designed to break familiar models of reality and see what replaced them. In private notes, a lead researcher scribbled, "Opening new channel." In the margins, another hand scrawled, "Do we want what answers we'll get?" The answer mattered less than the fact that someone had decided to continue anyway. Transfers within the facility became more opaque. Subjects moved in blindfolded under the pretense of different trial phases. Their names were no longer used in conversation. The phrase asset transfer appeared in muttered exchanges and then in formal memos. External transport routes were planned, supposedly to move successful trials to field testing. But the manifests began to show gaps. Vehicles listed with departure times never logged arrivals. Carriers marked as having received cargo recorded no inventory. In the control room, screens flickered and one by one went dark for the length of a coffee break, then restarted as if nothing had happened. It's important to understand how normal the environment felt while everything else unraveled. On the surface there were still lab coats, clipboards, and polite exchanges. The cafeteria served the same bland food. The air smelled of industrial cleaners. Administrative memos discussed budgets and grant renewals. This normalcy was the machine's oil. It kept people working, thinking in routine, because routine makes dissonance less audible. But the dissonance was growing. The gap between what was recorded and what was experienced widened like a twin fissure. Then, as the cliffhanger and the outline demands, the recordings went dark. One session, session 19, if you follow the internal naming convention, holds a file that begins without fanfare. The feed shows a subject, heavily restrained, lights adjusting, electrodes humming. For precisely 2 minutes and 37 seconds, the monitors spike and the audio captures something that technicians described later as a resonant pattern. The subject's eyes dilate. He presses his fingers against the table in rhythm. Static climbs the audio in an unnatural harmonic. And in the last frame before the file steps into the void, the subject lifts his head and looks straight into the camera, and the feed captures what one engineer swore was not a human expression. Then the file stops. No corruption marker. No end of file. Just absence. The recording is missing. The hard drive that held a dozen adjacent sessions shows a clean gap where session 19 should have been. Not deleted. Not corrupted. Gone. The investigators would later describe that blank space as louder than any scream. After the gap, the language of the clinic shifted in the logs. Where hope had once been measurable, now there was an economy of commands. Where research notes had been verbose, now they were spare admonitions. Shut down non-essential observation. Prepare for containment protocol alpha. Secure external comms. And the final line in the last public ledger entry from that period, typed and time-stamped with ruthless detachment, read, "Recording systems compromised. Begin isolation." Whatever the machines had captured, what the human ear, machine microphone, and cold sensors had combined to witness, it was something the project leaders could not allow to remain. They pulled the handles, shut the doors, and the darkness swallowed not just data, but the last appearances of a plausible justification. There's a moment every investigation into this project circles back to. A single pivot point. A fracture line in the story where everything that came before feels like a prelude, and everything after feels like a countdown. It didn't happen with a bang or riot or explosive escape. It began with one missing man. A technician, low level, barely cleared, no reason to matter, didn't show up for shift. At a normal research facility, HR would call his emergency contact. Here, they scrubbed his name from the digital roster within 8 minutes. His locker was emptied. His ID badge deactivated. On security footage from the cafeteria recorded just 48 hours earlier, his face is blurred, deliberately, not due to motion. Someone edited him out. The system pretended he'd never breathed the air in that building. And the strange part? No one asked why. Because 2 days later, a second technician vanished. Then a handler. Then a nurse. Their rooms sealed, their data overwritten with placeholder text, personnel not found. But people don't evaporate. Not in a locked facility designed to track every heartbeat, every breath, every cortical flicker. At the same time, the subjects began changing faster than logs could keep up. Sleep cycles shortened to minutes. Reflex responses accelerated. Language patterns collapsed and reassembled themselves into something new, clipped rhythm, collective cadence. Then came the night alarms. The night the breach began. At 2:47 a.m. siren ripped through Hall C, the wing used for cognitive stress evaluation. The kind of alarm you don't ignore. Doors sealed with hydraulic force. Red lights spun like the pulse of an angry god. Researchers sprinted toward lockdown points, swiping badges that suddenly returned red authorization failures. Someone, something, had overridden command. A junior medic later described it like this. The building didn't just lock us in, it locked itself out of us. They weren't in control anymore. Inside Observation Room 12, 3 subjects stood motionless in restraint harnesses that should have immobilized them. But the leather straps around their wrists were slack, as if they had shrunk. No, not shrunk. As if they had slipped through. Their arms dangled at unnatural angles, joints too loose, muscles tensed like coiled threads. Heart monitors traced perfect rhythm, slow, even, deliberate. They were waiting. One researcher, panicked, attempted injection sedation. When the needle entered the subject's vein, the monitor spiked, not from pain, but from awareness. The subject's eyes rolled upward, then forward, locking with the doctor's gaze. And in a voice recorded for exactly 7 seconds before the audio cuts to static, he said, "Stop." One word. Soft. But it froze everyone in that room. Not because of its meaning, but because it wasn't spoken alone. 3 mouths moved. One voice emerged. A single tone layered over 3 separate throats, as if their vocal cords had become strings tuned to the same frequency. The breach wasn't physical. It was cognitive. They weren't prisoners anymore, they were a network. A hive. And the hive had decided something. Security teams responded in staggered pulse waves, rifles raised but trembling. Their orders were simple: containment, retrieval, elimination if necessary. But necessity arrived faster than they expected. Halsey's primary restraints began failing simultaneously. Magnetic locks disengaged without command. Power relays overloaded, then fell quiet. Cameras delivered nothing but black screens and quiet dripping noises no one could source. When the first team reached the observation wing, every room was empty. Not escaped. Vacated. Subjects had walked out of their cells. No alarms triggered. No sensors recorded motion. Biological tracking chips showed all of them standing still, when visually, they were nowhere. The building was still. Too still. Then doors began opening by themselves. What follows is pieced from testimony whispered decades later. The missing technicians hadn't vanished, they had been absorbed. Rewired. Rewritten. They stood alongside former test subjects now moving with a frightening unity, eyes unfocused yet intent, walking like sleepwalkers who share a dream. Their backs tinged with strange red filament scars like neural pathways burned into skin. Their pulse synchronized. Their steps identical. The experiment had crossed its threshold. It was no longer studying them. It was using them. And before security could react, the hive spoke again. Through every mouth, every infected subject, every missing worker reemerged like a puppet animating itself from within. Stop resisting. Same voice. Same tone. Multiple throats. One mind. First soldiers dropped their weapons. Some prayed. Others ran. None made it to the exit because the exit was no longer responding. The building had become an organism, walls rerouting power, systems isolating hallways, ventilation ducts redirecting flow like circulating blood. Somewhere deep underground, servers hummed as if thinking. As if deciding. And the hive kept growing. Within hours, nearly half the facility was silent, not dead, not empty, just quiet. Like a room waiting for someone to speak first. Those who barricaded themselves inside administrative offices heard footsteps moving in exact unison outside their doors, pacing in rhythmic intervals, breath timed like machinery. One survivor reported hearing whispering beneath the vents, not speech, but thought residue. A collective mind processing itself. He wrote one sentence in his notebook before he was found days later, dehydrated and delirious. They don't need doors to enter, they only need you to listen. And then, the most terrifying thing of all happened. Not screams. Not gunfire. Not panic. Silence. A complete halt of movement. A stillness so total that microphones captured nothing but the hum of generators. When reinforcements finally arrived, they didn't find a war zone. They found order. Every chair aligned. Every document stacked. Every monitor powered down. Every test subject calmly seated as if waiting for a meeting to begin. But the eyes told the truth. They were present, but they were gone. And whatever was thinking inside them wasn't human thought anymore. Then the time-stamped logs end abruptly, not in panic, but mid-sentence. A final report begins with the phrase, "Hive integration has reached." And stops. Not finished. Not cut. Just stopped. As if something, or someone, decided there would be no more reporting. Because the experiment was no longer being observed. It was in control. What we do know is simple. After the breach, no communication left the facility. Authorities sealed the perimeter. Records vanished. Families were told nothing. The building was purged, some say burned, others say flooded with gas, and official channels archived the site under environmental contamination protocols. No bodies recovered. No survivors confirmed. Only one truth remains. Whatever those scientists unlocked, whatever those prisoners became, it didn't die in that building. Because ideas don't die. Networks don't die. Hives don't die. They migrate. And there were sightings long after. Former staff who rarely blinked. Men once listed as deceased boarding international flights. Anonymous figures with matching scars across their necks, all walking with the same cadence, like a memory echoing through muscle. Governments denied. Witnesses disappeared. The truth became myth. But myths are often just truths no one survived to finish telling. Which brings us to the final stretch. Where everything the project tried to bury finally resurfaces. Because someone leaked one last recording. A file that should not exist. Audio captured the night the hive took full control. And when you hear what's on it, you won't sleep well tonight. There's a kind of silence that feels peaceful. This was not that kind. This was the kind of silence that tastes like metal in the mouth, like something is wrong but refuses to say how. One day the facility still hummed with machinery, cameras, footsteps, voices layered in stress. The next day the comm center went dark. Not offline. Not damaged. Absent. Every phone extension returned a tone that did not exist on any telecom chart. Internal mailboxes wiped into blank folders titled simply, "No content." Emergency lines rang into rooms no longer monitored. The outside world knocked, and inside, there was nothing knocking back. Families were the first to feel it. Not relatives of scientists, but the families of the subjects. Men who vanished in cartel sweeps, smugglers pulled out of trucks, bodies never claimed in border disputes. People whose mothers still cooked for them on Sundays. Whose sisters kept the bedroom untouched. Whose children asked why daddy missed their birthday again. They didn't receive official missing person notices. They received something worse. Letters printed with no signature, no departmental stamp, uniform language like this. Your family member is currently detained for investigative review under federal authority. No visitation permitted. Await further contact. No address. No date. No contact number. Just a seal, not from a known branch, and a warning beneath, in small type. Do not inquire. And most obeyed, not from fear, but because inquiry requires a door. And this program had no door to knock on anymore. Then came the news blackout. For 11 days, journalists received tips. Border correspondents whispered about trucks that drove into the Chihuahuan desert and never came back. A local paper drafted a headline. Unknown facility linked to disappearances. It never printed. By morning, the full article had been replaced with a photo of a county fair and a pie-eating contest. The journalist's byline gone. Archive drafts erased. Every backup file overwritten with junk code. Even search results changed, like history bending itself. Typing the facility's rumored name into databases yielded nothing but no results found. No results found. No results found. As if the building had never existed. And yet, if it never existed, why were 3 families visited by men in clean suits, offering money to stop asking questions? Why was one woman told, by someone who never showed a badge, he didn't die? He was used. Used for what they never explained. But the mother remembered the man's eyes. The way he blinked too slowly. The way his speech came in measured increments. Like words weren't spoken but permitted. The silence outside mirrored the silence inside. Inside the facility, where the breach had unfolded. No alarms blared now. No gunshots. No movement captured on external cameras. Just stillness. When drone reconnaissance scanned the grounds, heat signatures inside were consistent with hundreds of living bodies. But none moved. Heart rates, if any could be read, were steady. Unchanging. Clockwork biological quiet. Security forces debated entry. Some argued for breach clearance. Others said containment must hold. But something deeper held them back. It wasn't fear of what happened inside. It was the knowledge that whatever lived in there might be waiting for the door to open. The silence held for weeks. Not inactive. Patient. Like a lung that never exhaled. No garbage left the building. No files uploaded. No vehicles exited. No bodies removed. The facility became a sealed organism under desert sun. A month after blackout, an object surfaced. Not leaked through whistleblower networks. Not posted online. Found. In a pawn shop. In El Paso. Bought with a pocket full of pesos and traded for a broken guitar. A single USB flash drive. Painted matte black. Stamped with no brand. Marked only with a hand-scratched number. X12. The shop owner plugged it into his register computer to check the contents. It didn't open files. It played audio instantly. A single, looping recording. Children laughing. A sound wrong for the context. Wrong enough to set every hair upright. Except it wasn't children. Audio analysis later revealed 24 layered vocal sources. Varied in age, tone, gender. Processed into something like laughter. But never matching known human signal patterns. In the background of the recording, if pitch shifted and slowed, a voice repeats one phrase again and again. We never left. The pawn shop owner took the drive home. The next morning his store was shuttered. He and the USB were gone. The building was purchased quietly within days. Ownership records sealed. More fragments surfaced over the next year. A notebook, found in a drainage tunnel, believed to belong to one of the scientists who barricaded themselves inside during the breach. Pages warped by moisture, ink bled into ghosts. Only a handful legible. The handwriting trembled, but urgency bled through spaces. Day 3, no perimeter breach detected. No sound from subjects. Eyes open. Breathing uniform. Day 6, they are not waiting for rescue. They are listening for it. Next page torn. Next words half dissolved. But the last intact entry, the one that chills anyone who reads it, was scrawled so violently it tore into the page behind. We hear them in the vents. They don't speak, they think through us now. Followed by a final line. If anyone finds this, do not enter. The notebook ends mid-sentence. Ink trails off like the writer stood up and never returned. Government actions following the breach were subtle, surgical. Land records sealed. Satellite passes rerouted. Local maps redrawn with empty desert. All FOIA requests returned records not located. Not denied. Non-existent. The experiment was erased so thoroughly that anyone insisting otherwise sounded delusional. And yet, one more artifact emerged. A cassette tape, hand-labeled with a date matching the night the facility went silent. It surfaced from a journalist who died months later of cardiac anomaly at rest. The tape contains 23 minutes of breathing. Nothing more. But in the last 14 seconds, something moves past the microphone. Fabric brushing. Footsteps. A voice, so faint you must amplify to hear, whispers. Door, open. Then tape snaps. Ends mid-spool. The last entry ends mid-sentence. Not stopped. Not cut. Frozen, like someone pressed pause on reality. And yet the silence persists. Officials insist no such program existed. Families still wait for a knock that will never arrive. Those who search too deeply lose access to bank accounts, passports, histories rewritten like chalk wiped clean. Silence is not absence. Silence is a presence that remains. When truth has been erased. And if the hive still thinks. And if minds remain connected. Then somewhere inside that silence, something is still listening. Maybe for us. Maybe for return. Maybe for instructions it hasn't received yet. Which leads to the next chapter of your documentary. For 3 days, nothing happened. Not officially. Not on paper. Not in the channels the government swore were secure. But silence is not the absence of activity, it is the absence of witnesses. And that silence, thick and unmoving as tar, settled over the desert like fog over a graveyard. Phones inside the facility stopped ringing. Emails, once time-stamped to the minute, no longer sent. The internal network, the one they believed no outsider could breach, went offline without warning, without backup, without so much as an exit log. Outside the walls, families waited. Some camped in cars. Some slept on folding chairs near the perimeter fence. Some clutched pictures so hard the frames cracked in their hands. No one yelled. No one protested. Because protesting requires hope, and hope was already bleeding out. Then came the first message. A short, automated notice, a form with no signature, delivered to every family connected to the program. Your relative is unavailable for contact. Please do not attempt further communication. No reason. No time frame. No department listed for follow-up. Just absence disguised as language. And then? Nothing. No whistleblower. No anonymous tip. No trembling intern stepping forward with stolen files. Just void. The nearest local radio station, once so eager to report military movement, no longer mentioned the facility. TV broadcasts that had previously speculated on groundbreaking medical progress suddenly cut away to weather updates. Newspaper archives that once glowed with praise now contained blank segments, like entire articles had been scooped out with a spoon. It was as if the world had agreed silently that nothing had ever been there. But people don't vanish quietly, not all of them. Not when someone on the inside refuses to go down with the rest. And that someone, we still don't know their name, risked everything for what comes next. A brown padded envelope appeared, unaddressed, taped to the door of the last investigative journalist still following the story. Inside was no manifesto, no confession, no dramatic explanation. Inside was a USB drive. Unlabeled. Untraceable. Cold from the winter air. Along with it, a single note. Do not watch alone. The journalist didn't listen. They plugged the drive into their laptop at 2:14 a.m. The video had no introduction, no date, no source stamp. Just static at first. Static like breathing. Static like someone holding a camera too close to their chest. Then, clarity. A hallway. Lights flickering, but powered. Floor smeared with something dark. Not fresh, not old, but tired. A sense that whatever happened there didn't explode, it drained. The camera moved, clumsy, as if held by shaking hands. There were doors, numbered, but some numbers had been scratched out violently, as if someone wanted to forget which belonged to who. Behind one steel door, something thumped. Not random. Rhythmic. Like a heartbeat. Like someone trying to signal. The camera didn't open it. Instead, it drifted toward a room marked medical storage, level 3, though the sign hung crooked, stained. Inside were beds, overturned. Restraint straps torn, some frayed by force, others cut intentionally. Trays of instruments scattered, scalpels, tubes, syringes, but no bodies. Not one. No survivors. No staff. No guards. Only the aftermath of something that refused to remain contained. At the 11-minute mark, the audio returned. Not voices. Not alarms. But a woman sobbing somewhere far away, so distant it sounded like memory instead of sound. The camera followed the noise, though the cameraman, if they expected to be alive much longer, shouldn't have. Down another hallway, darker now. Lights dead. Walls scratched. Deep gouges, like nails or bone or something harder tore at metal. A trail of footprints, bare and smeared with dried blood or something thicker, pulsed toward a chamber at the end. The camera entered. Inside, a single table. A recording microphone still blinking red. On the table, a notebook. Pages missing. Ink smeared. The writing uneven, frantic. The camera zoomed close enough for us to read 3 lines. Friday, they said the pulse doesn't stop when the body does. Sunday, we heard them whisper even after sedation. Monday, if anyone finds this, we. The entry stopped. The next page torn free, violently. And then just as the camera pulled away, a shadow crossed the lens. Not walking. Not moving. Just standing. Too tall to be human. Too still to be alive. The video ended. And silence returned, absolute, deliberate, suffocating. No bodies recovered. No staff relocated. No history acknowledged. Just the tape. Just the missing. Just the sentence, like this facility, like its story, that ends half-spoken. Unfinished. The USB was meant to disappear, history suggested that much. One whistleblower might leak a hint, a rumor, a whisper. But a video was different. A video didn't speculate, it showed. The journalist should have handed it over to authorities. That's what the law demanded. Instead, shaken, sleepless and paranoid, they did something else. They uploaded it. Not to YouTube. Not to a public archive. Not even to a reporter's network. They sent it to one friend. A name we still don't know. And that one friend sent it to another. And that one to 3 more. Until in 36 hours, the footage existed in 12 states, encrypted, mirrored, duplicated. When the government finally knocked on the journalist's door, badges raised, faces blank, they were already too late. And then came the moment no one expected. The public saw the hallway. The flickering lights. The torn straps. The notebook entries. that shadow in the final seconds like a promise rather than evidence. Most viewers dismissed it as fiction. A horror short. An ARG teaser. But those who had a connection to someone on the missing staff, they didn't blink. They didn't analyze lighting or film grain. They recognized the building. One woman swore she saw her sister's handwriting. Another recognized her son's jacket on the floor beside the overturned gurney. A retired guard said the steel doors matched a level of the facility that shouldn't exist, but did. Within a week, the video had 4.8 million views. Mirrors multiplied faster than takedowns could erase them. 2 news stations tried covering it. Both were off-air within 72 hours, technical failure. A trending forum discussing the footage vanished mid-thread. Reddit mods deleted every post within minutes of upload. Somebody wasn't just concerned. Somebody was terrified. And fear from above always means the truth is close. But the most inexplicable part was not the footage. Not the hall. Not the empty beds or the woman crying somewhere deep inside the walls. It was the timestamp. The digital imprint wasn't old. The recording was recent. Not archived. Not historical. The silence wasn't years ago. It was happening now. That detail changed everything. Suddenly this wasn't a closed case. This wasn't a forgotten tragedy. The facility wasn't abandoned, it was active or recently so. Which meant if the experiment continued, new victims existed. And if no one survived the first time, what made them confident enough to try again? Journalists demanded answers. Families marched with signs bearing faces without graves. And yet, statements from officials grew colder, shorter, scripted. There is no active facility. There is no evidence of human testing. There is no missing staff. But denial isn't truth, denial is preparation. Behind closed doors, the government began something colder than any admission. They started retrieving people. Not suspects. Not informants. Anyone who shared the video too widely or too boldly. Gone. Offline suddenly. Phone numbers erased. Homes entered with warrants never shown. The operation wasn't just a silence. It was to recontain. Because maybe the leak wasn't just the footage. Maybe someone else got out. A second whistleblower surfaced, an ex-lab tech who spoke through a scrambled voice modulator on a pirate radio frequency. They weren't confident. They weren't dramatic. They were terrified. Their testimony aired one time before the frequency jammed. The bodies didn't deteriorate naturally. The pulse remained days after death. They strapped them down because sedatives stopped working. Something woke up on its own. Listeners laughed, for 20 minutes. Then the station cut to static and stayed that way for a week. The tech vanished. Apartment empty. Mail uncollected. Phone disconnected. Whatever they feared caught up fast. But the real fracture, the moment the cover-up cracked, was when the second video surfaced. This one didn't show empty rooms. This one didn't show aftermath. It showed movement. Same hallway, different day. Camera lower, as if carried by someone crawling to stay quiet. The lights flickered not randomly, but in sequence, as if responding to something moving beneath them. Then it appeared. Not clearly. Not centered. Just a shape at the edge of frame, tall, slow, heavy like a sedation tank learning to walk. The sound that followed wasn't a roar. Not a scream. It was breathing. But not through lungs. Breathing like circulation itself. Breathing like blood moving without a heart to push it. The cameraman cried. Quietly. Broken. And then ran. The frame shook wildly. Doors blurred by. The breathing grew closer, not chasing, just arriving everywhere at once. Then the recorder fell. The last shot was the creature's shadow stretching across the lens like a curtain lowering on a stage no one wanted to be inside. End. Cut. Silence, again. Except this time silence felt like a countdown. The internet erupted. Some swore it proved resurrection. Others insisted it was bioweapon research gone rogue. A few claimed it wasn't human in the first place. But the darkest theory wasn't about what they created. It was about what they brought back. Because bodies don't breathe after death. Cells don't restart themselves. Voices don't whisper under sedation unless there's something left inside to wake. And whispers spreading through encrypted forums suggested one thing. The test subjects never died. Not all of them. Maybe none of them. Because if they survived, or changed, then the government experiment that nobody survived was not a failure. It was progress. Progress that escaped. And if one shadow made it to a camera lens, how many made it to the world beyond the fence? And that brings us here, to the razor-thin line between truth and terror. The leak didn't just show evidence. It showed proof of continuance. Whatever happened inside that facility did not end. It expanded, outward, unseen. And tonight, we are only one step away from the part of the story people are most afraid to hear. What the experiment really was. And what it became after the silence. Because next, we reach the truth. In the end, truth never explodes like a bomb, it leaks like water through concrete. Slow. Relentless. Impossible to stop once it starts. For decades, Project Meridian existed the way all dangerous things do, in fragments. In classified memos, sealed evidence lockers, redacted testimonies, whole paragraphs eaten alive by black ink. It survived in whispers, in the shaky recollections of retired operatives who drank to forget. In rumors that refused to die. Because someone, somewhere, couldn't burn every copy, couldn't silence every witness, couldn't bury every ghost. And then, after 43 years of silence, something finally surfaces. A brown package, no return address. Left on a small-town journalist's desk like a ticking secret. No note of explanation. Just two objects inside. A scratched silver USB. And a 5-word message. Tell it before they do. She plugs it into a computer that isn't connected to the internet, just instinct. 5 video files appear. All dated between October 1984 and March 3, 1985, the week Facility 12 supposedly died. She opens File 1. A grainy corridor, peeling blue paint under fluorescent lights. 8 men in lab coats. 4 uniformed handlers. A woman strapped to a metal chair. Eyes hollow. Mouth gagged with blood-soaked fabric. In the corner of the frame, Test Series 1A, Live Subject Response. Unremarkable at first. Just another secret experiment in a decade full of them. But then, the journalist sees it. The shadows. Moving independently. Reacting. Learning. The footage cuts to black. She sits frozen, because she realizes she was not watching a failed test. She was watching contact. 2 days later, curiosity wins over fear. She opens File 2. A man strapped upright, electrodes lining his spine like a steel centipede. Speakers embedded in the walls hum at a frequency the camera barely captures. His pupils swallow the iris, pure black ink expanding where life should be. Then he begins to speak. Not English. Not any language known to Earth. Words scraping like metal on bone, coordinates, numbers, fragments of a grammar built for something other. 3 minutes in, his jaw dislocates. For minutes, his heart stops. At 4:30, he opens his eyes again. Not dead. Not alive. Something in between. The power cuts. The tape ends. And the journalist is left shaking, sweating, crying, because she now understands. This wasn't about control. It was migration. Whatever Meridian contacted wasn't meant to fit inside a human mind. She leaks frame 221 anonymously, just one still image, to an obscure internet forum. No context. No backstory. But it spreads. Fast. Archivists recognize the insignia in the video, a triangle inside a broken circle, rumored to be linked to Cold Region's Treaty black sites. Government agencies issue takedowns faster than humans should be able to type. Threads vanish mid-refresh. Entire accounts evaporate. Someone is scared. Because this wasn't supposed to be seen. Not after all these years. But it's too late. More encrypted drives surface, one mailed to a university cryptographer, one to a retired military doctor, one to a paranormal data archivist. They open them. Break them. And they all show the same thing. Meridian wasn't abandoned. It was contained. Transport logs prove the project didn't stop after March 1985. It moved. Payload labeled as reclaimed units. Cross-border transfers. Port entries. Final destinations redacted completely. If true, then the subjects weren't disposed of. They were distributed. Into cities. Across states. Into everyday life. Sleeping. Waiting. Finally, someone breaks. An old scientist, dying and unafraid, records a testimony. His voice trembles like a man who has seen too much. Meridian wasn't research. It was translation. We weren't studying them. We were inviting them. He reveals Phase 4, activation threshold. The moment when subjects stop resisting and start welcoming the thing inside. Then the final video, File 5, plays. A man stands freely in the testing chamber. No restraints. No guards. No fear. He places his hand on the wall gently, almost lovingly, like greeting something alive. The lights flicker. The feed warps. Static crawls like a virus across the frame. Then, one word through the speakers. Calm. Intimate. Certain. We're still here. The video corrupts itself, pixel by pixel, like something inside the file is hungry. One frame remains, the last frame. The man looks straight into the camera. His eyes pitch black. His mouth still. Not smiling. Waiting. Because Meridian was never shut down. It's simply completed. The exposure is not closure. It is a beginning. A countdown. Already ticking. So here we are, not at the end of the story, but at the edge of it. The truth about Project Meridian did not topple governments. It did not spark riots. It did not tear society open the way a revelation like this should have. No, the world absorbed it like a bruise. Quietly. Slowly. Deeply. Because truth isn't explosive. It's infectious. People watched the footage, but most turned away, terrified of what believing would mean. Agencies denied authenticity, but their panic exposed them more than the leaks did. And somewhere, in homes and cities and quiet neighborhoods, Meridian's reclaimed units might still exist, walking, sleeping, aging like anyone else. But something lives behind their eyes. Something waiting for its signal. We don't know when activation begins. We don't know what the threshold is. We don't know how many of them were released. But we know it's more than one. We know exposure wasn't the collapse. It was the breach. Because fear spreads faster than secrets. And curiosity spreads faster than fear. The leak did not shut Meridian down. It gave it a doorway. And now more people are looking. More files resurfacing. More hands turning over old stones the government prayed would never be touched again. The journalist, the woman who received the package, vanished 3 months after the leak. No body. No note. Just an apartment unlocked and a wiped laptop. Her last online message read, "They know I didn't keep only one copy." And that sentence becomes the spine of everything that follows. Because maybe she didn't vanish. Maybe she's still out there. Running. Hiding. Mailing evidence to strangers like seeds in the wind, hoping one lands in soil where it grows. Or maybe she was reclaimed. And maybe she's waiting for her activation cue too. Because when the truth came out, the world didn't collapse. It shifted. Not loudly. Not suddenly. But like a door opening a centimeter wider each night. We don't feel danger all at once. We feel it gradually, like pressure rising behind the walls. Like a whisper we almost hear. Like a shadow that moves when nothing is casting it. So ask yourself, what if Meridian never ended? What if the facility didn't fall, it spread? What if the countdown we didn't know had started is already nearing zero? Because this story is not about the past. It's a warning about the future. About our future. And if the people behind Meridian built a way to open the human mind, then whoever, or whatever, was waiting on the other side might already be here. Inside someone you walked past today. Inside someone you know. Inside you, maybe. If you felt something strange since hearing this story. A dream you can't explain. A word you don't remember learning. A voice in the silence that isn't yours. If you felt that, Meridian hasn't just been exposed. It has entered you. You carry it forward. Not a story. A frequency. A key. And if this video disappears, if the audio corrupts, if the channel goes dark, you know why. Not because the truth was false, but because it was too close. And if you ever receive a blank envelope, or a scratched USB, or a message that simply reads, "Tell it before they do," then it's your turn. Because no one survives Meridian. They continue it.